What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Sports Weekly podcast. I'm your host, Christian Royston, joined by my co-host, Logan Shanks. We're going to recap a bye week, so not much going on for Iowa State football, but big week for the Big 12, and then going into this Baylor game. There's a lot to look forward to. So we're sitting here at the midseason. You know, a lot of people probably had high expectations for most of the Big 12, not really Iowa State, I want to say. And I would say that it kind of flipped where the Big 12 is now. Maybe not as competitive, but Iowa State has been one of the more competitive teams. I guess, what have you seen out of them so far?
Yeah, I mean, Iowa State's definitely flipped the script a little bit. I mean, you know, you're only one game over 500, so you can't say that it's a complete turnaround of a season. But going into it, a lot of people didn't even predict that, you know, that they would even be able to get one or two conference wins. And from last season, they've tripled their Big 12 win count, especially with that big win on the road against Cincinnati. So, you know, I think, you know, it was right for people to doubt Iowa State, especially with having new starters, and they had a new offensive coordinator as well. So, but, you know, definitely it's been exciting to watch Iowa State, you know, change things as the season has gone on. I mean, just like any other team, you know, you're going to have to change things as the season goes on, but especially for Iowa State with such a young team, it's been really exciting to watch.
Mm-hmm. I think the big thing looking at this team is that it is such a young team, and going forward, we're going to have this team for, you know, however many years we have left. And going into the season, we were kind of expecting a more veteran, like, seasoned team, which is why we kind of had a little bit higher expectations. So when we were hit with, you know, the roster changes, I think we were all expecting this to just be marked up as a growing season, and it has kind of been a growing season, but at the same time, we still got 5 games left, and they're still kind of shooting for a bowl game here, which could not be said last year with the one win that they had in the Big 12.
Right, and you talk about, you know, this team being, they're going to be together for a long time, and I think that's more present with the offense than the defense. I think there's a lot of defensive guys that they're going to miss next year, but guys like Rocco Becht, Eli Sanders, I mean, everyone in the receiving room is going to be able to come back, so that's going to, you know, definitely help the growth of Rocco next year when he enters his second year in the system as a starter. But yeah, it's just been really surprising to see, especially Rocco. I've talked about him a lot, not only on the podcast, but in columns and whatnots, but he continues to not only surprise me, but others about how, you know, he's kind of adapted to the college system, and he's played these different roles at each game. He's been like a game manager, and then there's games like, you know, maybe against Cincinnati and against Oklahoma State where really he has to be the one that dominates to win the game.
Yeah, and I think you talk about many people maybe doubting Rocco Becht. I was in that train where last season when Deckers was struggling quite a bit, people were like, oh, throw in Rocco. Rocco's going to do stuff. And I was in the boat that, you know, Rocco might not have been that guy. But I think the growth we've seen from just the start of Big 12 play, or just, you know, like 2 weeks even before Big 12 play up until now, he's just been constantly growing. And he looks to be a guy that can, like, lead this team to wherever it wants to go. And I think that's what they need, especially going forward into the, you know, seasons onward. You know, this offense, I don't think I didn't expect it to kick on this fast, especially I thought they might struggle a little bit at the start of the Big 12 play. But just to see them kind of already going through their growing pains way early in the season, and now they're kind of into a groove where they can kind of like move the ball at ease most of the time. I think it's a good thing just going forward, just to see that.
Yeah, in the run game, you know, it's been up and down. You know, it had. I am going to say that it does need to start being better again, because against Cincinnati, you know, if Rocco isn't able to, you know, decipher the Cincinnati defense as well as he did, it could have been a lot hard. It could have been very hard for the Cyclones to move the ball, because the run game just did not really work, and that game could have been played very differently if Rocco isn't able to do what he did. But the run game definitely needs to get back to what it was, you know, against TCU and on the road against Oklahoma a little bit. But, you know, I think having a bye week will definitely be it was definitely probably a week for them to reset and look at what needs to still get better. And what they need to keep improving on as well.
I think the bye week should be just almost a good reset point for them, maybe in a way where they're not maybe losing too much of the momentum since they are on a win streak right now, but in more of a sense where they can kind of sit down and take it back and say, well, okay, what's working in these first 4 games of Big 12 play? Why did we win when we won? And then, take a look at the Oklahoma game and be like, okay, what was the issue here? And I think when they take a look at that, I think the run game is probably going to be one of the places that they're going to put a lot of focus on, especially since I know that they're probably tired of getting berated with questions about, when's this run game going to kick on? Because you guys, before the season, were kind of saying that it was going to be super special.
Right. And, you look at these next 5 games, that run game is going to be crucial because, if you have to rely on Rocco again, through the first 7 games, you start out 4-3. Those last 5 games, if you have, inconsistent play from the run game and maybe the defense gives up a couple big plays like they did in a couple games to start the season where, a little uncharacteristic, there's a spot where, optimistically you're thinking the best case scenario that Iowa State goes is 4-1. But, with the more inconsistent plays, you might start to look at 3-2, 2-3, especially with a lot of these games coming on the road like BYU and this Baylor game, which, Baylor's not a team to scoff at. They haven't won at home yet, which was very surprising to me. Yeah. But I think that they've showed that they're very capable of putting the points on the board. And, they've played some pretty good defense as well throughout the year.
I think Baylor's like a team that's kind of hard to scout because they've had, I guess, like some good weeks, honestly. I mean, the one that sticks out to me is their comeback against UCF. Really showed that not only can they compete against Big 12 competition, although, you could argue that, the newcomers are maybe not living up to the standards that the Big 12 has so far. But that comeback really showed that they want to win games. So, I really don't want to count them out too soon, but yeah, the big thing that really sticks out to me is just no home wins, especially since they started the season against Texas State.
Yeah, I mean, that loss against Texas State, I remember we were watching, it was like, circling week 8 for game 8 for Iowa State.
That's a win.
Yeah, that should be a win, but, looking at it closer, they just beat Cincinnati by 3. I mean, Iowa State just beat Cincinnati not by 3, but, so I think, the game against Baylor, it should be, it's probably going to go into Iowa State's way. Baylor, they're looking probably like one of the closer to the bottom teams in the Big 12.
Yeah.
Big 12, as always, is looking very top heavy, especially, with Oklahoma and Texas. But overall, yeah, Baylor, they've shown their ability to always either give up big plays on the ground or through the air. I talked about their defense. I said they played some defense. They've showed that they can occasionally that they might be like, hey, we don't want to give up points on this drive.
Yeah.
But at home especially, I think it'll be interesting to see if Iowa State can keep that streak going of not only keeping Baylor winless at home, but Iowa State getting a second win on the road in the conference. That honestly to me is a little crazy to think, but with games against Cincinnati and Baylor back-to-back, it's looking pretty probable.
Especially considering that they had like 2 years there of 2 total wins on the road. So, yeah, 2 wins on the road in Big 12 play would be huge for this team, especially going forward. We look at how young they are. It would just show that, this team can get good and can compete with really any team in the Big 12. And although we are kind of dogging on Baylor a little bit, they are still a Big 12 team. And
right.
It's still one of those. The Cyclones don't want to go into this like they went into Ohio. It's one of those matchups that if you kind of count it as a win too early, Baylor's a team that might sneak up on you, kind of like they snuck up on UCF.
Yeah, and Baylor's fans, they're nothing to scoff at. I mean, they're going to pack that house. And one thing that Baylor has consistently had throughout the last couple of years, just like a lot of teams in the Big 12, is a really good wide receiver room. I remember we were just watching some highlights from their past couple games, and their quarterback Shapen, is not that great. I'm just gonna say it. He forces his receivers to make a lot of plays on the ball, And but fortunately, Baylor has some talented receivers. They've got one guy over 400 yards and then another over 300, and those guys are both averaging 18 yards per reception. So that's definitely going to cause some trouble for the DBs for Iowa State. But I think they're definitely up to the challenge, especially when you got guys like TJ Tampa, Bo Freeler, and the nation's or I'm not really sure where he's at now, but Jeremiah Cooper, who's got 5 picks on the year. So
yeah, you talk about Cooper. I think I kind of like where Iowa State's sitting right now, where Baylor's one of those teams that favors the air, and Iowa State's one of those teams that can really defend the air. So it should be one of those games where Baylor doesn't have like that running back, that guy that can really just push forward. Like they played against TCU, and there was Bailey who was ripping off like 20-yard runs here and there, and there was against Cincinnati even their quarterback was pushing pretty far down the field just by himself.
Yeah,
I think Baylor's one of those teams that's going to be favoring the air a lot more, especially if they find themselves down to start the game. And if they do favor the air, we'll probably see Bo Freeler, we'll see TJ Tampa, Cooper get in the mix. And when they do, I mean, we see their interception numbers, we see their pass defend numbers. Like, yeah, I think they'll be eating, especially like real good.
Yeah,
against the Bears.
I mean, just thinking more about this game, I'm leaning more towards Iowa State's side. I becoming fairly confident that they'll take this one pretty handily, especially since, talk about that run game. Shapen's not one that, he's not really a quarterback runner as well.
Yeah.
But I will say, just watching him play, he does roll out a lot. So, it has been something that Iowa State's defensive line has struggled a lot with. They're not going to get the sack very often, but, like you said, if the DBs can just keep covering the field while he rolls out, I mean, it's going to be a pretty easy game for the Cyclones down in Waco. Waco, yes.
Yes, Waco.
Okay.
They do. You talked about youth, but also like the opposite, being the defense is probably going to send a lot of people. I think this is going to be one of those games that we see the defense kind of step up and really show us what they can do. It's going to be on them to keep the Bears, scoring like very little. Especially, I think this could be a big momentum game for the Cyclones. You go on that 3-game win streak. Your offense has been playing well, and your defense has been a little shaky at times, especially for like a veteran group. So I think if they are able to maybe go in there and like really just cause them issues, the defense is going to be like really set for when they come home and they take on Kansas.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it right there. I mean, coming home and taking on Kansas, a team that has also, they've proven themselves a little bit. They lost that game against Oklahoma State when Bean threw for 5 touchdowns, which is just insane to me because I'm pretty sure he came in with 4 passing touchdowns on the year.
Yeah. And then threw 5 and still lost.
Yeah. So sorry, Jason Bean. That sucks.
I will say, Oklahoma State is one of those teams that if you play them at home, you're going to lose or you play them at Oklahoma State, I should say. Oklahoma State is like very good at home, and it's kind of crazy to see because I didn't think they were going to get like half of their wins that they did at home. But you get them on the road, they're kind of looking like the team that Iowa State took down.
And for some reason, to me, if Iowa State beats Baylor and then they're at home and they play Kansas and they beat them, for some reason, to me, I see them dropping a game against BYU strictly because that would mean that Iowa State would win they'd be on a 5-game win streak. I don't know. I just going on the road again and winning 6 straight, going and then having to play Texas. I just don't really see that, especially for how young this team is. But it could happen, definitely for sure. But I see, of these last 5 games, they're probably going to drop at least 2. We'll be in attendance for the K-State game, so that'll be awesome to see. But it'll be that'll definitely be a hard one as well.
Yeah, K-State. I released a recapping the Big 12, and I kind of put them into tiers. I want to say like Kansas and Kansas State are both teams that are like surprisingly good right now to the point of they could honestly contend for a Big 12 title. Like last season, it was TCU's to lose, and then Kansas State went in there and they took them down. And then, of course, they played Alabama, honestly, pretty close to start that game. And then, SEC schools take over.
Yeah.
But we might see a similar thing with Kansas, too. Like, there's honestly a path for both of those teams to make the Big 12 championship. So if Iowa State can get a win over, honestly, either of them, it's probably going to be a huge win for them, especially since Kansas is one of those teams that has been in and out of the rankings. Kansas State started the season in the rankings. So they're both very capable teams currently, which is honestly kind of weird to say about Kansas.
Right. And I talked about it a little bit in my column that, Iowa State, throughout the years, they have been known to pull off some upsets at home. And for them to pull off an upset against Texas, I don't think that's completely out of the question. Yeah. I know Texas is a completely different monster. They've got 5 stars all over the place, but something about playing at home, for Iowa State is just completely different.
You get Iowa State in those black unis in the night.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised,
Texas will be shivering in their boots there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, if, so they'll announce the Texas time after the Kansas game, right? So, if Iowa State wins again at home for homecoming, don't be surprised if that game is, a night game, prime time for Iowa State against Texas.
Could happen.
And then, Iowa State pulls off an upset. But, we're got a lot of ifs and buts. We're looking forward a lot. Let's focus back on Baylor. Yes. Like I said, I'd probably lock it in as a win for Iowa State. I think, Baylor, they haven't really, this is kind of a down year for them after a couple years ago. They were in that Big 12 championship game, if I'm correct. They've had, good running backs go through, like I said, good wide receivers. They had a really good defense when, the new Nebraska coach was there. But when Matt Rule was there, they had a really good defense. But, I'll probably predict, you can check in later this week for staff picks, but I'm just going to say right now, I'll predict an Iowa State win, and by at least, I'll say 3 scores.
3 scores, okay. Yeah, I think I did put Baylor down in the bottom with the new schools besides I want to say BYU. I think I had a little bit higher, but they've shown that they can beat the newer schools. I don't think they've shown that they can beat any of the other Big 12 schools though. So I think when we're looking at the outcome of this game, I think the one thing that I'm looking at is that Baylor's really struggling and Iowa State is not. Iowa State has the momentum, and I think this is the most beatable that Baylor has been. So I would almost I'm not going to say maybe a 3-score victory just because Iowa State tends to burn me when I go for big wins, and we've seen Ohio. But I do see maybe a 2-score victory. I think they could beat them by at least 10, especially after what they did to Cincinnati.
And when I mean 3-score, I mean by 13 points. So we're talking 2 field goals and a touchdown.
Not 3 safeties.
Not 3 safeties, not 3 touchdowns. Okay. 3 scores, not 21 points. But yeah, I would say at least a 13-point win for Iowa State is what I would say.
After this Baylor game, we're looking at the Cyclones. Obviously, us giving them a win, we're looking at the Cyclones sitting at 5 wins. So that puts them 1 game out from a bowl game.
Yeah.
Going forward on the season, they have 4 more chances. I mean, we talked about the possibilities of those games turning out. I think there is a good chance that they make a bowl game, and probably a good bowl game, because I think there is a good chance that they don't just win 2 more games this season. There's a good chance they could win 3 or 4.
Yeah, if they get up to 7, 8 wins, that's where they get into that decent bowl game, and if you just say it's 6 wins, you end at 6 and 8, 6 and 9. You're not going to end up in the Barstool Cheez-It Bowl. I don't know, whatever you want to have as your lowest bowl game. But no, I think last time that I looked after the Cincinnati win, they were predicted to be playing in the Tax Act Bowl against Texas A&M. So, kind of a mid Big 12 school playing against a mid SEC school, which on the last podcast, I think we talked about the SEC has just itself been having a down year.
Yeah.
So, and I think Texas A&M is a good team and it'd be a good competition for Iowa State, but we'll just have to see where Iowa State ends up. But I think a bowl game is very, in the realm of possibility for Iowa State.
Mm-hmm. I think honestly there is a chance that Iowa State wins out the season. Mm-hmm. Like these games coming up are honestly pretty winnable. You look at Baylor. Obviously, Baylor's had struggles. They can't really win at home, and Iowa State's playing them at Baylor. You look at Kansas. It's going to be a homecoming game for Iowa State. They're probably going to be riding a 3-game win streak, so momentum's on their side. Mm-hmm. You look at the BYU game. I think BYU is one of those teams that is maybe doing better than most of the new schools, but still has their off moments.
Right.
And yes, it is being played at BYU, but I think there's a good chance that, Iowa State can maybe carry momentum to that, especially having 2 road wins on the season. Mm-hmm. And then honestly, once you ride that high, I think you go into Texas with the win streak that Iowa State would have, and it might honestly be a pretty close game. I think a lot closer than we might have thought before the season.
Yeah, and at that point, you're not just worried about a bowl game. You have a real shot, against Texas. If you beat them, you have a real shot at the Big 12 title. And then, against Kansas State, where another team that, has been pretty good, you just said, has a shot at making the Big 12 title game as well. We'll just have to see where, what happens with Texas and Oklahoma, because, those have obviously been the 2 big schools that, have been at the top of the Big 12 mostly all year. And then, UCF almost beat they almost beat Texas, I believe.
Or I think...
Who did UCF just play and almost beat?
I think that was Oklahoma, and then Houston almost beat Texas.
Yes, that's right. UCF almost beat Oklahoma and Houston. Yep, that's right.
Which was kind of crazy, especially after seeing that, like, the new teams were struggling, and then they just kind of flipped a switch this last week, which maybe that's just how the Big 12 is going to be, where you can't really predict what's going to happen next.
Right. But, overall, it really looks like it is going to be between Oklahoma and Texas. Mm-hmm. Maybe Iowa State can, keep sneaking itself in there. But in terms of a bowl game, I think it's very likely that they end up in probably a higher one. An article that I'm reading right now, this is just midway through the season, obviously, but it has them in the AutoZone Liberty Bowl, a spot that Iowa State is familiar with. They played in the Liberty Bowl a couple years ago. And then the next one is in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, which, again, a Cheez-It Bowl is something that Iowa State, again, very familiar with. And that's actually, I'm reading it, and it says Iowa versus Ole Miss.
But the other one did have either Missouri or Kentucky. Iowa State was going to play.
Yeah, so, maybe I shouldn't be looking over there. But sorry, Iowa
it's
fans.
Whatever. Iowa... Ugh. I think, kind of segueing, speaking about Iowa, I do think Iowa State has honestly had a good season if you take out that Ohio game. Mm-hmm. I feel like maybe people look at that Ohio game a little too much and be like, oh, Iowa State lost to Ohio. Like, that's kind of a really, really low point for them. But besides that, they lost to Oklahoma, who is honestly competing to be in the college football playoffs this season. Mm-hmm. And they lost to Iowa, who's been consistently in and out of the AP top 25, despite, Iowa's, maybe lackluster performances at times.
They lost to Iowa. They lost to Iowa's defense. If
Which
you remember,
most teams all teams this season have.
Exactly. And, I can't blame them for that, especially because, that's just what Iowa's worked off for the last, 5-6 years with guys like, Nate Stanley, Spencer Petras, and now Cade McNamara, and Deacon Hill in there. Mm-hmm. Not great quarterbacks. Out of all those guys, Nate Stanley is probably is the best one. And you think Cade McNamara is going to be the better one. Sounds like I'm hating on Iowa right now, but I'm just being realistic that most people figured that this was going to happen. Iowa State just needed to be better against Iowa's defense. And one thing that we've talked about is that, both teams play their worst game It's just about who can be a little bit better.
Yeah.
And those three losses, Ohio definitely one that people look a little bit too much on. Oklahoma, you're going into Norman. They compete a little bit, but ultimately you're going to lose that one. And then Iowa, that was also still when the offense was still learning. And I think, it's easy to say this now, but if Iowa and Iowa State play right now, Iowa State probably takes the win there. But, I don't know. It's
kind of it's one of those things where you talked about a young offense. I think if Iowa State was playing like they are now, I think they kicked it on maybe a little too late. Maybe they should have kicked it on against Iowa. But I think if the offense that is playing now played the whole season, I honestly think they probably would have just lost to Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. And, that's easy for us to say because, you're playing the ifs and buts of college football.
Yeah.
But, that Ohio game, you think about it, there was that sickness too, but you can't just blame it on that. I mean, the defense played great, but offensively, like the run game would not work. They were without Jalen Noel. Iowa State has found success without Jalen Noel in games as well, even when he has played.
Yeah. You look at the last game even. He had like 20 receiving yards.
But, that was, again, I think a lot of this has been needing Rocco Beck to play really good football, and he's been doing that down the stretch, and I think that's why they've been winning these games.
And I think maybe going forward, that's what we're going to see is this is a more competitive Iowa State than the non-conference Iowa State. This is almost a completely different team.
Yeah.
That switch from like Ohio to Oklahoma State was pretty crazy for me to see. And now I think you leave that Ohio game and it's like, okay, this team is going to be lucky to repeat last year. But then you leave that Oklahoma State game. Now we're leaving the Cincinnati game, and it's like this team is almost a lock for a bowl game. It's more so now how many more wins can they get? Not like can they get another win.
And I think the team really, I mean, this is something that we could ask the players, but I think just having that like reassurance that you guys are like having the locker room still together. Like at this point in the year, last year they were what 3 or 4 and 5, maybe 4 and 6. No, that wouldn't be correct. But
7 games in, they were probably 3 and 4 at this point.
Right, but just having the locker room still together, and like you said, it's for them now. It's not, can we make it to a bowl game? It's all right, guys, like we can band this together and we could see ourselves in the Big 12 championship or a high bowl game against, this is a team that everyone doubted and, is a young roster on offense. And yeah, I think the camaraderie with the guys in the locker room, that just has to help, especially when, you can have faith in your starting quarterback who, again, like I said, a lot of criticism coming into the season. Could he take the reins and be the next great quarterback for Iowa State? And I'm not saying that he's been a great quarterback, but he's definitely shown in spots that he can, for these next couple of years, just keep getting better and better and just work with the system that Iowa State has for its quarterbacks.
And we talk about going off that bye week. One thing I really don't want to see them lose is maybe this brotherhood, this momentum that they have. They've really come together over these last 4 games, and it's really like a different team that we're seeing, and I think that's gonna bode for them well going forward.
Right, and for them to have this brotherhood, especially down the stretch for these next 5 games, if you can keep it going, not just the wins, but the camaraderie, it's only going to get better as you go on, especially if you take it. Your next big road challenge is against BYU, and then if you can take that again, coming in against Texas at home, I mean, you could set yourselves up for a big upset. I think it's just, I keep saying this word every week, but it's just going to be, a very interesting next couple of weeks for Iowa State. But I will mention if it stays course for Baylor, they are currently on a win-loss pattern, and they won their last week. So if the pattern stays,
just another thing going against them. But that, I guess that is Baylor, huh? This year's just not really been their year.
No, not really at all.
Yeah, I think this is honestly the most winnable Baylor game I've seen in a while, because usually Iowa State goes into these Baylor matchups and it's like, well, they're probably just going to lose again. Like Baylor's just really good at beating Iowa State. But
Yeah.
this year it's like I would be shocked if they lose. So.
Yeah, there's a different, kind of optimism in the air heading in, especially with, how Iowa State has played these last couple weeks. It's just all the stuff that you talked about, they have to keep over this bye week. They just got to take that in going into Waco this week.
Yeah. And I think not much else there. We're just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah.
So join us next week as we recap the Baylor game. Hopefully we're not sitting here eating our own words, but we will see you next week. Thanks for watching.